It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. I'm really excited about today's show. We got Dr. Lance Moore. He's an author. He's written 9 books on all of our topics. Everything we discuss here on the Opperman Report all the time. This guy's right up our alley. The book we're talking about today is Cults on Trial, a cross-examination of Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Hitler, and Donald Trump. Don't go nuts. Dr. Lance Moore, are you there?
Yes. Hey, Ed.
Thank you so much, my friend. Before we get into this book, Cults on Trial, tell us about yourself. Who is Dr. Lance Moore?
Well, I will add, I hope all your listeners stay tuned because this isn't about bashing Trump, even though I'm not a supporter. I want people to remain open-minded and listen to some important things I have to say and hang with us. But as far as me, I like to think I'm a fun, interesting guy. I've authored 9 books in my 67 years. I have an odd paradox that I was a professional rock musician, toured and played on stage, never made it famous, just had a lot of fun, and also was an ordained minister in the United Methodist Church. So the wonderful thing is that most of my congregations embraced that I could rock and roll and preach.
Yeah, I was an assistant youth pastor at one time, and the youth pastor went on to start his own church, and he was just like you, man, musician.
There you go.
Great worship leader. I love this guy. So then people can find your books at LanceMooreBooks.com. So give us an idea, because all your books are like right up our alley. Why don't you give us an overview of your history of writing books?
That website, easy to find and definitely where you can see them all and nice little pictures of all of them and get them in a quick look. Picture speaks 1,000 words. Got the covers on there for all 9 books. And yes, my interests are divergent, but they're similar to a lot of the topics that I see you like, Ed. I have my best-selling book is called Killing JFK: 50 Years, 50 Lies, from the Warren Commission to Bill O'Reilly, A History of Deceit in the JFK Assassination, where I think I take apart the Warren Commission pretty good and show that the government itself, if you dig deep enough, shows there was not only a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, but a conspiracy to cover up the true culprits. Then a whole nother topic of actually more consistent with my role as pastor. I have a book called A God Beyond Belief, Reclaiming Faith in a Quantum Age. Kind of a mixture of science and religion that I think is refreshing from maybe what some people expect of a quote minister. I'm not, as I just said, I'm not a traditional Bible thumping pastor. I like to think I'm open-minded anyway. I even have a book on called Class Crucifixion, which is about the way the ultra-rich have basically robbed the middle class and working folk of a decent living so that they can have multiple yachts and multiple mansions, and doesn't make me a communist. It makes me a reasonable person who goes, with all of the innovations that computers and technology have brought us, tremendous wealth, it's all gone to the top. So that's a whole nother day's topic. So there's a few things.
Yeah, I think the way I found you was Killing JFK, 50 Years, 50 Lies.
Yeah.
Right, and then I added you on Facebook, and then I guess a squirrel ran by, and I got distracted. I never invited you to the show. Okay, so what are we going to find here in this book here? Cults on Trial, a cross-examination of Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Hitler, and Donald Trump.
Well, the inclusion of the names like Manson, Hitler, and Trump is meant by design to be provocative and to kind of attract readers. I'm not an idiot. I know I have to market books. Writing them is only half the battle, as you know. Promoting them is the other half. But here's the phenomenon underlying this topic of cults that intrigued me, and that is that there are some very specific, predictable traits and tactics, personality traits, psychological traits, and then methodology, the way that people of that sort, demagogic leaders and religious cult leaders, ways that they manipulate people, that when you step back and kind of drop your emotions and drop your one's tribalism, whether you're Republican or Democrat or in between, whatever, drop that for a minute and just look at it kind of like a psychological study. It's astounding how this list, which is in the book, is a checklist, how predictable it is. I joke about it. It's predictable in hindsight. And, of course, everything's predictable in hindsight. I can predict every football game in hindsight what the final score will be in hindsight. But you see what I'm saying. You can when you step back and look, it's amazing how every one of them will follow, let's say, out of a dozen traits and tactics, most of them are going to check off 9 or 10 of them. And, of course, there can be variances according to whether they're political or they're religious or whether there's something else like, say, Scientology. It's amazing how similar they are. And so that's a phenomenon in my mind of human nature and human psychology.
That's interesting, and you see these people, the names are and just in the title: Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Hitler, and Donald Trump. And we don't want to offend anybody,
right?
Yeah, some people are sincere with what they're doing. But now, what do you think it is, though? Is it organic? Is it something that they do instinctively, that they learn these tactics? Because some of these folks, like Jim Jones, you hear these stories, CIA, MK Ultra's trying to kind of plant. What did you kind of conclusion did you come to in that area?
Well, let me first hit that word offensive. I have had people in my own family that go, are you trying to say Trump is Hitler? Because he's not. And of course, I'm not stupid. I get that. Hitler killed millions of people, caused worldwide war. I mean, duh, we know that. The Holocaust is not to be minimized. So nowhere in my book am I saying that Trump is Hitler at all. In fact, my chapter on Trump, which is one of many chapters, starts by giving that disclaimer that I'm not equating the two. But I'm talking about something bigger, again, than tribalism or politics, about the question that you didn't ask, which is, what's going on with people who seem to fit this paradigm or this pattern of being a leader, but being a leader who has specific methods and ego traits. So anyway, to get to the answer of what you've asked, it's, to me, in a phrase, malignant narcissism. And if you'll bear with me, I'll unpack that just a second. I have a theory that we're all narcissists, Ed. I know we all – nature instills us with a survival instinct. Take care of number one first. Everybody has an ego. You and I have egos. We want to be thought well of, etc. And that's sort of like normal walking around narcissism, self-interest. Nothing wrong with that, really. But the word malignant, when it becomes where a person, these leaders in particular, seem to only be able to care about themselves. And we can have a longer conversation about where that comes from. Was that instilled in Jim Jones by MK Ultra, or was it from birth, or was it from parenting? I talk a little bit about that in my book about what forms a cult leader, and that's still an open debate. That old is it nature or nurture? Was it were you born with a twisted mind, or were you or did the mind become twisted because you were abused or whatever it might be? And so I talk about that in the book. In a nutshell, I conclude, for our purposes of dealing with this as a society, I'm not so sure it's helpful to have to ascertain exactly where they emerged from or how they emerged. Is what do we do about it, And The answer to that, I think, has to do with the word truth. But anyway, let me pause and you jump in here with me. Help me out.
Well, first of all, when you mentioned how we're all a bit narcissist, I remember when I first learned the word, I first learned the definition of the word in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. Me and my girlfriend looked at each other and said, we're both narcissists.
There you go. Prove my point. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are. And
I'll throw this joke in there. What's the difference between someone who's a narcissist and someone who's not? So the first category are just honest. The second one is just self-deceived.
But it's something we should all work on. You know, we don't want to encourage that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you want to have limits to it. That's the point, is that taking care of oneself, you know, you got to do that. You got to eat right and exercise and sleep and all those basic things and have an income, all those things. We can't all go up on a mountain and be a monk, you know, and retreat from the world. We have to be engaged in the world, and to be engaged in the world, we have to be confident in ourselves and self-supporting and all that. You can make an argument for self-care without a problem. But the limits, and that a quick limit when it comes to the ones on the top subtitle of my book, is when they don't show any sign of empathy or care for persons beyond their immediate orbit, where sure, they're going to be nice to their own family. Well, let's take Trump and Hitler just real quick. Again, they're not the same, but Trump loves his children. That's obvious. Hitler loved dogs, his pets, and children. He was very loving toward them. But that doesn't cure the narcissism. The narcissism is measured or tested by the next circle outside that. The people that work for you, your staff, the people that are the next ring out, who are just people in the community that you barely know. Are you caring about them? Are you reaching out to them? Or do you throw them under the bus when they no longer are useful? And I would challenge, like I say, even pro-Trump supporters, look at Trump's career. When once people have ceased being useful to him, be honest. What does he do with them? Let's take one name. Somebody I actually know, Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions was the most wonderful person on earth when Trump appointed him as Attorney General. But then once Sessions did one little thing that Trump didn't like, he ruined the man's career, threw him under the bus. He couldn't get reelected. And he'd initially been elected senator of my own state in Alabama by a landslide. Trump destroyed him. Now, I could go down that list. I bet you could too, Ed, right?
Sure.
And add names to that. Isn't that pretty compelling?
Well, then let me ask you this, because you and me were talking about this, and we're coming at this from the angle of the narcissist, self-confessed narcissist, like an AA meeting, you and me, and a narcissist meeting.
Exactly.
But what about the people who worship these folks? There's people out there, maybe not Jim Jones, although I've interviewed some of his followers, and some of them still like him. Yeah. But Charles Manson still has worshipers. Hitler certainly has worshipers.
It's crazy, but it is there. Yeah.
But then what makes them? They're not narcissists, but why do they have that need to follow and become a cult member?
That's a great question, and I would love to engage that, because it's kind of two quick answers to that. Yeah. You know, one is that is definitely a different category of a cult follower or a tribal follower versus a leader, and taking away any kind of moral judgment, just looking in general at leaders and followers. The human race is full of that dichotomy between those who just seem to have the traits that are we need leaders. You know, we can't have civilization without leaders. So I'm not knocking that difference. And we need, quote, followers. We need people who are willing to get up and go to their job and help the world by being there and doing, I don't want to say doing what they're told, but I think you get my gist, that we need people who aren't wanting to be the boss, but are wanting to be contributors in whatever place they find themselves. So there's an obvious difference in just the quality of what makes a leader. But then when it comes to cults, we have these extremes in both those categories. We have the leaders who are over the top, where they have to not just be the leader, they have to be the dictator or the king or the worshipful center. In fact, one of those hallmarks of a cult is that they will always have one human being, not a god, not Jesus or someone, but a human being at the center of their worship, the center of their organization that calls 90% of the shots, and it's all very circular around that one dot in the center of the circle. So that marks a cult. And then the followers, to get really to your question, they have a couple of things. They have a greater need than average to feel belonging, purpose, and being a member of a tribe, to put it in simple terms. Now, we all want to be in a tribe. I mean, I like being a football fan of a particular team. Going to church, you want to feel like you can sign on to the belief system that you're attending. So that's normal. But when the tribalism becomes, here's the important phrase, when it becomes framed as an us versus them, then we have a serious problem, and then we have a cult, and cult followers for whatever reason. I don't want to call them gullible, because many of them are just fine and wonderful people, but for something in their personality, they long to buy into, this is my tribe, and every other tribe must be wrong. Every other tribe might even be evil, but I'm on the side of good. It's a good instinct. I want to be on the side of good, don't you, Ed? I mean, but you see what I'm saying? It's a personality type, I have to say, that jumps on the bandwagon, that signs onto the team bus a little too quickly.
When I go to your Amazon page here and I look up the book Cults on Trial, A Cross-Examination of Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Hitler, and Donald Trump. By the way, yeah, great reviews, 4.8. There's only one 4 review. Every other review is 5.
Yay.
Okay? Yeah, you can't beat that. Okay, especially on a topic like this, so controversial. Do you think?
Right, and I will get some attack. Probably after this interview, I'll get some attack reviews, but that's okay.
Yeah, I got a big hate listener. That was a hate listen. But
I heard you say that on your show a week or two ago about how much hate stuff you get. Like, what is that about? But that's another topic.
That's another topic. Man. That's no. But you mentioned in here in the description, drawing upon court cases. What kind of court cases did you study to write this book?
Ed, you're just doing wonderful questions here, because that is indeed that rank. See, we focused on the subtitle at first because that's controversial, but the title is Cults on Trial, and there's an important part of the book, beginning in the preface of the book, where I write that when you take a cult leader who's normally accustomed to being, as I said, in charge, the dictator, the head of the cult, nobody questions him or her. When you take them and you place them into a courtroom, it's an artificial environment. It's a constructed environment where you have rules and you have an adversarial situation which is designed to elicit a greater truth. You've got the defense attorney and you've got the prosecution. They each have their stack of facts, hopefully, and those facts are tested by the way they're admitted into evidence. And then also there's the accountability of a little thing called perjury. So for some of these cult leaders, for the first time in their life, they have somebody saying to them, now, if you lie here, you can be arrested. You can be fined. You could even be put in jail just for telling a lie. And for people who use deception as one of their tools on my checklist of traits and tactics is using deception, spinning an alternate reality or a narrative that's generally false. When you're accustomed to doing that, and then suddenly you're in a courtroom where they say, no, you can't do that, or we're going to call your hand on it, I say in the book, they become like a fish out of water, just gasping for air. Now, are we going to see that in these Trump trials that are now going on? I think you will over time. It's going to take a while for that process. It doesn't happen in one day in court. It's an sort of evolutionary process as time goes by. the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor, they eventually chip away at that alternate reality, and the jury begins to say, okay, I see this right here is bullshit, and this over here is not. So, yeah.
23, 27. I just had it there too, man.
I'm a pastor. I don't normally use I consider the bull word to be, it's become like a generic term for propaganda. Let's say that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, I noticed here in your author, about the author, it says that you're a pre-sentence investigator for Alabama Circuit Court. So I'm sure you drew upon that experience, right?
It's helped add to my knowledge of the court process. Most of the other stuff in my book, I've studied cults all my life. I also, in the first chapter in the book, I talk about my own personal experience as a pastor counseling a couple that were sort of refugees from a cult who had escaped a cult and needed help, and that became formative. That was years ago, and that became formative in my thinking on this too. But studied cults because they're interesting most of my life, but more recently, after I retired from parish ministry, still needed a little health insurance, so I have a day job. And my day job, I deal with the law and with courts and with prosecutors and that process. So yes, that's been helpful for me to be refreshed on that side of things. So yeah.
And I bet you were a great pretrial investigator too. I bet you had a lot of empathy for these people. And really took the job seriously, because I've seen so many errors.
Well, I could say
in those reports.
I could say a big yes to that, but that'll sound like a narcissist.
Yeah, right. Well, that's my next question. Because now you mentioned you were in church leadership. You were a pastor?
I was pastor of parish churches in Alabama and West Florida in the United Methodist denomination, which I mentioned also in the book when I talk about Jim Jones. As an aside, that's an interesting chapter in that Jim Jones started out wanting to be what I was. He wanted to be a United Methodist denominational pastor, but the denomination, unlike just a church that started by one guy off on a street corner, has a series of checks and measures and accountability measures that stopped Jones from becoming a Methodist pastor. So it's kind of fun to see the process worked. The system worked in that case. Unfortunately, it wasn't a legal system. They couldn't arrest him for being crazy. They just identified him as crazy and said, no, you're really not the kind of guy we need leading a church. But back to your question, I had a successful ministry. I'm not a televangelist, so I don't have a private jet. Sorry.
But my question was, did you find yourself seduced by the because so many people in a church, they adore their pastor, they worship their pastor, he can do no wrong. And the attention, the constant attention. Did you find yourself seduced by that? Because I did. I bet my ego.
Yeah. There's two sides of that coin.
Yeah.
One side is absolutely. You get up every Sunday morning, and you're the center of attention. Pastor, you're the center of attention, and you get to speak uninterrupted for. I tried to do a 20-minute sermon, not drag it out. And then you go to the back door and you shake hands, and most of the people coming through are eager to shake your hand and say, "Pastor, good to see you. Thank you for a wonderful sermon. You're wonderful." Blah blah blah. And of course, that can be that can make the ego get outsized. But the flip side of that coin is, I like to say, okay, my last church when I retired, I had 500 members. So guess how many bosses I had? 500. And you would be surprised what people will blame the pastor for. They will blame you for the color of the paint in the fellowship hall, even though I had nothing to do with the choice of the color in the fellowship hall. Okay, so you do get enough criticism and we'll say constructive criticism, but also sometimes just people just get downright mad at you, and it does have a counterbalancing, humbling effect. So I'll tell you this: I think probably my ego was more inflated by being a rock guitarist for a number of years, because there you don't really get a lot of critics. Everybody's, if assuming you're in a good band, which I was fortunate enough to be in a very good band, a couple of very good bands. So I wasn't even necessarily the greatest guitarist in the world, but good enough band where people say, "Man, y'all are awesome," and that's all you heard. So yeah, there's a lot of places that a narcissist can get fertilizer for their narcissism, and maybe that's one reason why I retired. I just needed to get back to kind of a normal life. So I no longer play guitar on stage. I no longer get up and do sermons. But here I am on the radio. What are we going to do, Ed?
And as a rock star, people aren't complaining about the pew cushions.
Exactly.
Yeah. People, that's like their biggest complaint.
Yeah, the pew's not comfortable. It's your fault, Pastor. And you have to go, well, these pews were installed literally 100 years ago. I did not design them. I did not put them in place. But no.
See, I wasn't kidding. He's got his answer already. This is the number one church complaint. Dr. Lance Moore, the book is called Cults on Trial, A Cross-Examination of Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Hitler, and Trump. And you can find him at lancemoorebooks.com. What kind of, as a society, what kind of guardrails can we put in place to put some type of, to slow down the rise of these narcissist dictatorship cult leaders?
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Supreme Court ain't doing it.
Yeah, it's a challenge in our day and age. Now, then once again, there's a couple of answers I could throw at you. One is looking at non-political cults. The easy answer, but hard to do, is just better education. And I think the internet. Here's where I think the internet has actually helped with that. For instance, we take other cults I mentioned in the book, like Scientology, which, sorry, Scientologists that are listening, but that's a belief system created out of whole cloth, out of thin air, by a science fiction writer who doesn't build on the Bible. He just builds on his idea that these extraterrestrials came and created thetans and all this stuff. So the point is, you can now, with just a few clicks of the mouse, type a few words, you can find volumes of absolute documentation showing the abuses of Scientology, the mistakes they've made, and just the fallacy with the whole premise or philosophy, using the internet. So education. Now, the other side of the equation, where you have political demagogues, which function the same as a cult leader in most cases, Hitler did. It's trickier there, because a lot of times they have great power and control over the media. It's interesting. Trump, well known for his entire political career screaming about fake news, and now we have learned that actually he controlled a lot of the news. He had a leash around the National Enquirer. It's just come out in court, Colts on trial, in court, sworn in testimony by the owner of National Enquirer, whose name I don't even want to say on the air. If you get my joke.
Sure.
For the listeners, Ed had reminded me that FCC rules, we're not supposed to use certain words on the air. So anyway, that David P. guy, he admitted that they fabricated stories, just made them up to boost the candidacy of Donald Trump. Then you've got, before that, you've had Fox News on trial on the stand under sworn testimony, where both the owner and some of the top host commentators of Fox News also admitted under oath that they too lied and spun the news to benefit Donald Trump. Now, in fairness, yes, absolutely. Democratic leaders have been known to control certain networks. Maybe control is too strong a word, but to strongly influence. I can think of one where a CNN commentator gave interview questions in advance to Hillary Clinton, which is, an unfair slant on the news. So it is more difficult. I'm trying to answer your question in a roundabout way. That is that I don't know the answers. I do think the trial process is one answer, a key answer. But as you just mentioned, with the Supreme Court kind of not looking too sharp the other day, we don't depend on any single judge or any single court. But if we keep standing up for the principle of the rule of law, I think that has a lot of value in stopping the excesses.
Earlier, I was asking you some questions about MK Ultra and stuff like that, right? And you mentioned L. Ron Hubbard, who had a relationship with Aleister Crowley.
Yes, you mentioned Crowley on the air the other day, so I thought about that. And Jack Parsons, interesting topic. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, and both Crowley and Parsons and Hubbard had intelligence backgrounds, and they had connections to the occult. And you look and Charles Manson had connections to the occult. Hitler had connections to the occult. Mm-hmm. Any of your studies find a correlation between these narcissist dictatorships and the occult? Well,
you actually brought up two things that each one of them could be a separate book, and that is the deep state intelligent connections. Let me take that first, just real quick, because I would say that it's usually not a case of this all-powerful deep state, Illuminati, or whatever word people want to use. Like they didn't create Aleister Crowley. They didn't create even Hubbard. But those personalities are always looking for an angle. They're always looking for a power base. They're always looking for some way to get ahead. So if they have the opportunity to bump into an intelligence agency that they can become some way associated with, then they might jump on that more than, say, you and I would, because you and I would be going, well, I don't know that I want to promote my own career by selling out my country or whatever it might be. So there's probably more of a coincidental thing going on with some of those socialists, like Jim Jones. Also is accused of having some kind of MK Ultra thing. The evidence on that stuff is pretty thin, and I think it's more on the side of coincidental than being some master plan that put these people in place. Now, what was the other half of the equation I was talking about? I've lost my train of thought. Ed, help me out here.
Well, one was their intel connections. The other one was their occult connections.
Yes, thank you.
Because, a lot of people believe that this QAnon thing was that Colonel Michael Aquino and his warfare, mind war propaganda material, because the same folks surrounding that are involved in QAnon. What do you make then?
Well, let's say this first of all. As I say in the book, Cold Stone Trial, there is a difference, but a little overlap between the word occult and cult. They actually I can sound real smart in saying that I know Latin, but I'm not that smart about foreign languages. It was the only foreign language in college I was required to take one, and it was the only one that I found simple enough to deal with because I didn't have to learn how to speak it. It's a dead language. So I learned some Latin. And the Latin derivatives, or the roots for the word cult and the word occult, are actually different. They're not the same thing. So a cult is more synonymous with the word sect, as in a religious sect that has that group of followers in a circle around one particular leader. And the other thing that designates a sect or a cult is that they stand outside of society. They have their own little world, versus occult, which means, as you know, a hidden. If you have a occult bleeding, it means you have blood in your intestines that you can't see, so it's hidden. So that's the word occult. So occult means hidden knowledge, in some cases, dark arts or black magic, which is in the shadows and stuff. So we got to distinguish those two words. I think that's helpful to remember. But then not coincidentally, then we do see the overlap where, again, Charles Manson dabbled in the occult. We mentioned L. Ron Hubbard. He got associated with Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons, who was a Crowley disciple. And he was genuinely into black magic. And then Jim Jones tinkered with it a little bit. But most interestingly, I find, is Hitler. Hitler was absolutely all about diving into the occult worldview, and there's a whole chapter in my book on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In fact, the Hitler chapter focuses on two things. It focuses on the propaganda aspects and the mind manipulation and hypnotic effects that Hitler seemed to have a skill for, and that's where it parallels Donald Trump. But I want to be fair to Trump. I haven't seen any hard evidence that Trump is any kind of occultist. I think he's just a non-Christian, but I don't think he follows the devil or anything like that. Hitler was a committed occultist, and I talk about the Thule is spelled Thule, the Thule or
right.
Thule Society. That was a clear occult movement in Germany even before Hitler was born, but he quickly found it and got into it. Am I making sense here?
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's easy to get sidetracked with this stuff because it goes every which direction.
No, I would love to check out that chapter on Hitler and the occult, because there was a certain kind of occultish flag that he had, that each soldier had to physically touch that flag. And they would line up and pass by the flag, and each one touched the flag in order to just incredible stuff when you look into that Hitler with the occult stuff.
Absolutely.
And it appears that Trump, although you're right, I know he's not a Satanist or would have that kind of knowledge. 2 Corinthians. The guy has no idea what he's talking about. I laughed out loud. I saw that live, and I laughed out loud, and I said, no one else saw that? He was at Forward University when he said that. But I believe, and I think you can see it, everybody can see it, hypnotic suggestion, man.
Yeah.
Trump is very aware of that, and the power of positive thinking. Norman Vincent
to be
Peale.
honest,
Yeah.
I got to interject there.
Yeah.
To be honest, it's on the record that Trump read Hitler and emulated some of his traits and tactics purposefully, and it's been successful for him. The way you speak to people, the way you engage people with trigger words and words that speak to their kind of deep tribalism. That's what Hitler did with the whole Aryan thing. You talk about the symbols. The swastika is actually a Hindu Indian symbol that he adapted, but he also had I think the one you referred to is the SS, which is actually a pair of lightning bolts. That's a very occult symbol. And he had his higher elite officers had to go to these rituals where they were kind of like being knights of the round table, except nefarious knights.
No, so then your background is Methodist, right?
Correct.
Right. So then your belief in the gifts of the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit,
Sure.
Healing, tongues, prophecy.
As Methodists, we don't emphasize that as much as, say, the Pentecostalists do. But I don't scoff at people's religious expressions. Methodism is a little more leaning toward the sort of rational academic side of things,
right.
for good or for bad, depending on your view. But I totally want to encourage people to embrace spirituality in the way that is meaningful for them, as long as it's not harming anybody. So. Anyway.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just that fellowship, of being in that body of Christ every weekend.
Yeah,
you can't.
Well, let me interject this then, because you made me think of it. I also have a chapter in the same book, Cults on Trial, about is Christianity a cult? Because it does mark Christian churches and Christian movements do check off some of those same checklist hallmarks of a cult. But then I spell out where the differences are. But, Jesus started out with what was functionally a cult. 12 disciples all circled around him as the one authoritative leader. And so yes, I have to be honest with dealing with that. And I do so in the book in a way I hope is helpful so that people can see I'm not just dismissing the good instinct to want to belong into a community, to have beliefs, to even have a kind of tribe you root for. There's nothing wrong with that until it goes beyond the pale.
So true, because isolation can even be worse.
Yes, yes.
And you become more isolated. And they talk about it with this new social media obsession and addictions. The more isolated you are, the more likely you are to become involved in conspiracies and racism, and bigotry, and these kind of negative traits. When I look at you on Amazon once again, it says part of the book is exposing the methods of manipulation found in cults.
Yes. So one of to me, the heart of this book that I think would be useful to people regardless of where they fall on the spectrum of politics or religion, is it's actually on my copy. It's on page 32. The cult culture template of traits. That's a long phrase, but cults have a certain culture, a certain way of being, their methods and means. And there are 8 significant categories that I talk about, beginning on page 32, if anybody wants to get the book, where I spell out. I think it's very helpful, even though some of them are obvious. It's when you see them all written down together that it paints a picture of, okay, I see what's going on there. Well, just to take one of them real quickly. I don't know how much time we got left.
We got about 10 minutes. We have plenty of time.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Well, like number 3 on the list is cults and their leaders use resonant emotion and compelling narrative. Cult leaders connect with followers via emotion first, not reason, using a passionate narrative to trump data. And I'm using the little letter Trump there. that narrative is more important to them than facts. They spin a mythology or a version of reality that can be very emotionally attractive. And I talk about resonant emotion. That I have a fun thing in the book. That if you are familiar with acoustics, going back to my guitar background, if you take an acoustic guitar and set it next to a piano, and they're tuned together, we're both at A440, and you strike the A key on the piano, the A string on the guitar will ring with it without touching the guitar.
Whoa!
And that's called resonance. It's a principle of physics and acoustics, and that resonance is pretty cool. It's pretty cool that it happens. It's like the piano's reaching out and strumming the guitar. It's very, very soft, but it's for real. So I take that and say this can happen with people. Yeah. A leader who has a kind of natural gift for looking at Ed and going, I've gotten to know Ed here a little bit, and I know what really rings with him, what really is meaningful to him, and that's the string I'm going to pluck. And once I act like I care about that same string, and you mentioned racism, that can be an example. If I see, well, I shouldn't have used you, Ed, but let's say John Doe, if I see, man, he is really passionate about hating ethnic minorities, so I'm going to throw a little buzzword out here that rings his string that he'll think that I am total agreement. I am empathetic, sympathetic, and resonantly emotional with him. That's very powerful to people. It strikes at a person's core longings. Right?
Sure.
Yeah. And then the narrative is to go beyond, say, a single thing. To have a narrative that's compelling, that's as old as cavemen sitting around a fire, and the eldest caveman tells a story about the time that they had a great forest fire and they had to flee as a tribe, and how they survived and how they overcame that, and that cements everybody to the tribe, because it's a great story. I mean, it's just like any great movie or TV show. If it has the elements of plot and a challenge has to be overcome, and then a resolution, conflict and resolution. The elements of story are rooted in who we are as humans. We all love to hear a story. So some of these leaders, Manson comes to mind. He has us in another chapter I talk about. He spun this ridiculous story about the coming collapse of civilization and how they were going to save the world when they were only, at tops, maybe 40 people in his cult at the max. But they were going to save the world because he has this narrative that's compelling, and he was a good storyteller, and it hooks people. And you can then connect in QAnon, which I have a chapter on.
Oh, really?
QAnon has a story that there's all these baby-eating Satanists who are out to get you, and they're out to, and we've got to stop them. And that's pretty compelling. I'd like to stop any baby-eating Satanist that I see. So it sounds absurd, but that's an example of what goes on. It grabs people.
And just imagine, too, like Manson's followers, they had never read the book of Revelation, so whatever he tells them, oh, really? That's what it says? They believe whatever he says.
Yeah, they were young. You got a point there, too. They were young. In his case, they were mostly young people, and they're more impressionable, and cult followers often are very impressionable.
So you said you had 8, and the first one was emotion.
Oh, well, I'll just hit these real quick if you got a minute. The first one is obvious. That was not the first one. That was just one that I think is kind of fresh that people don't think about a lot. The first one is obvious. Personality worship of a charismatic narcissist. Cults are centered around that leader, and we talked about that. Second is psychopathy or psychopathy. Frankly, many cult leaders are criminal psychopaths, and that gives them a power. Because, you and I have a limit to our power because we're not going to do something that's going to hurt somebody. But a psychopath doesn't give a hoot. They will hurt anybody if it furthers their goals. And so that gives them a power, and it gives them within an organization an ability to not play fair, and that increases their power. So number 3 is resonant emotion and compelling narrative that kind of go hand in hand. Number 4 is manipulation and mind control. Within an authoritarian structure, that's where the cult leaders are masters at manipulation, and they will use a variety of tricks and leverage to be king, basically, within the cult. Number 5, messianic cult leaders, and they don't. Every cult leader doesn't check off every one of these boxes. Okay, just most of the boxes. Some, as we mentioned, set themselves up as the savior. We've got this enemy out here, this us and them, which is actually number 6, tribalism, the us and them worldview. But number 4 is that number 5 is I'm going to be the Messiah who can save us from those enemies out there. And often that's tied in with a religious thing that I'm anointed by God, I've got supernatural power, or I'm called as the prophet or the chosen one to save us. It's striking that some televangelists were calling Trump the chosen one and the anointed one, which is another day's topic. To finish up here, number 6 is tribalism, that worldview of us versus them that glues the group together. And number 7 is this is more in the motive behind a cult leader is self-enrichment. In cults, the cult leader owns or at least controls everything, and their dictatorial power usually leads to their own enrichment. And with that couple that came into my office for counseling that had escaped a cult, so one of the things I was able to do for them was help them reclaim the value of the Range Rover $100,000 automobile that they had bought for the cult leader because he wanted to drive a fancy car. But they paid for it, and so they were able to get that back in court. And then, I didn't help them with court. I helped them sell the vehicle in the end, so they could live. Anyway, I digress.
On the other Saturday, just recently I interviewed Doug Papa, who was a cop, and when he lost his job, he was recruited by the Cult Awareness Network by a bunch of on-duty cops and FBI agents. Well, not FBI, but on-duty cops who were running around kidnapping people to deprogram them. And even they became corrupt and started kidnapping people that were lesbian to reprogram them from their lesbianism. Okay? So
I don't. In my chapter on solutions to cult thing, I certainly don't recommend that because that's it. That's no worse than the cult leaders, because you're taking people against their will. There has to be a better way, and I think there is. But being positive, reaching out with love, and an alternative community of care and love, that's much more effective than if you deprogram somebody. Then eventually they're going to get around to realizing, oh, they manipulated me just as much as the cult leader did.
Oh, absolutely. I was saying that the programs were just as abusive as the cult leaders. We only got a couple of minutes left. Okay, now we're in scary times. These are terrifying times. Now, what is the solution? We elect Biden instead of Cult and instead of Trump, and all this is going to go away. This insanity is not going to go away, man. What do we do, Dr. Lance Moore?
Oh man,
it's in your hands.
You want me to solve the big problem? The big problem is our political system is pretty well. Well, on one hand, I embrace our political system as far as democracy and the Constitution, which Constitution and the Founding Fathers had a great idea. But we've become this two-party system where neither party has any real allegiance to the working person. Their allegiance is to corporations. You know this. And so I'm not like Mr. Gung-Ho Biden. We're given a pretty binary choice this particular election, and I think you got to choose the lesser of the evils. And I don't think that Mr. Biden will destroy our democracy, okay? But yeah, we got a much bigger problem, and that goes to my book, Class Crucifixion, where people who are greedy, like excessively greedy, the uber capitalists, and who have no moral whims or whatever, no moral values. Right now, we're at their mercy. And they've got money which controls the politics, and they control our lives. And my only answer, Ed, is to do what we're doing, which is write books and use podcasts and radio and internet and TV, any access that we can find to get an alternative view out, rather than what is fed to us by the corporate behemoths that seem to own the airwaves to a large degree. The internet's changing that, though.
Well, we'll keep shoveling into the ocean. Okay, so we've been talking to Dr. Lance Moore, LanceMooreBooks.com. The book we've been talking about is Cults on Trial, a cross-examination of Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Hitler, and Donald Trump. But many, many, many books here. If you go to LanceMooreBooks.com, A God Beyond Belief, Class Crucifixion, Killing JFK's 50 Years of Lies. I got to tell you, Dr. Lance Moore, I'm struggling with doing this job, 11 years. It's an uphill battle,
I get it.
To have an afternoon to talk to someone as brilliant as you and as likable as you've talked me off the ledge one more day.
Oh, good. I hope I've done something today. Well, I totally encourage. This is going to sound sycophantic or whatever, but let it be. I totally encourage you. I just said this is exactly one of the solutions we have to our problem, is to get people like you out there fighting the good fight, even though it can be frustrating.
Thank you. I wish. Thank you, sir. Call me tomorrow around this time, okay? Cheer me up again. Dr. Lance Moore, one more time, LanceMooreBooks.com. You hear the guy. He's a great storyteller. You can imagine what the books are like. The Cults on Trial has 4.8 reviews. Whoever this 4 guy was, I would imagine what his complaint was to give you a 4-star review.
I don't think too many books are perfect. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lance Moore.
Hey, I hope we'll come back. Maybe we'll talk about God Beyond Belief next time, a little more
whatever.
Less emotional topic as far as the politics.
Yeah, whatever. I would definitely enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.